The morning air was crisp and thin as Officer Sophia drove her patrol route along the mountain switchbacks until she caught movement in her rearview mirror. A tiny German Shepherd puppy was racing after her patrol car, its small paws scrambling against asphalt, refusing to slow down despite obvious exhaustion. She eased off the accelerator, thinking it must be lost. But when she stopped and opened her door, the puppy didn't approach for comfort or food. Instead, it barked sharply, spun in a tight circle, then bolted back toward the tree line. It stopped, looked back, barked again. Something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just a stray wandering aimlessly. It was trying to communicate something urgent. Its frantic, purposeful behavior made her heart race with recognition. Against every protocol telling her to call animal control, Sophia followed the little pup into the dense forest. What she discovered at the edge of that cliff moments later left her paralyzed with shock and forced her to confront the demons she'd been running from for 6 months. Before we continue, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And I'm really curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how our stories reach people around the world. The mountain road curved endlessly beneath towering evergreens, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the early light into shifting patterns on the pavement. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the cab of the patrol car, and the only sounds were the whisper of wind through needles and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Officer Sofia Martinez rolled her shoulders, trying to release tension that had lived there for half a year, her eyes tracking the familiar bends and turns she'd memorized by now. It was her 6th month on this isolated mountain route. Quiet duty, far removed from the emergencies and split-second decisions that haunted her sleep. She'd requested the assignment specifically. Out here, there were no teenagers trapped in burning buildings, no impossible choices, no voices screaming for help she couldn't provide fast enough. The mountain, in its vast indifference, asked nothing of her except presence. It didn't judge her for the life she couldn't save. Her cruiser rolled smoothly along the winding asphalt, tires humming softly against the road. The radio occasionally crackled with distant dispatcher chatter, a fender bender in town, a noise complaint, but nothing that required her response. She sipped lukewarm coffee from her thermos, letting her mind drift to how strange it felt to find sanctuary in isolation. How grief had taught her that sometimes peace meant distance. But peace, she was about to remember, often arrives just before fate demands you face exactly what you've been avoiding. Sophia stepped off the pavement and into the forest, immediately feeling the shift from solid ground to uneven earth, carpeted with pine needles and moss. The puppy moved with singular determination, weaving through ferns and ducking under low-hanging branches with practiced ease, as though it had traveled this path many times before. Every few yards it would pause, turn its small head back toward Sophia, and wait just long enough to confirm she was still following before pressing forward again. The forest swallowed sound in a way that felt almost deliberate. Her footsteps, usually crisp and authoritative, became muffled thuds against soft ground. The radio chatter that had been her constant companion faded to nothing but the creak of leather from her duty belt and her own controlled breathing. She reached for her radio, pressed the call button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I'm approximately 2 miles north of mile marker 47, pursuing a possible distress situation. Can you copy?" Static answered her. She tried again, adjusting frequencies, but received only white noise in return. The mountains were notorious for creating dead zones, pockets where radio signals simply vanished into the granite and altitude. Sophia pulled out her phone next. One bar flickered weakly, then disappeared entirely. Her GPS showed her location as a vague circle covering several hundred yards, the blue dot wandering uncertainly across the terrain. Technology, it seemed, had abandoned her to instinct. The puppy pressed on, and the terrain began to change. What had been relatively flat forest floor started tilting upward, becoming steeper with each passing minute. Rocks emerged from the soil like ancient bones, forcing Sophia to watch her footing carefully. Her breath came harder now, partly from exertion and partly from something else, a creeping awareness that she was committed to this path with no backup, no communication, no safety net except her own judgment. That judgment, the same judgment that had told her to enter the building 6 months ago, the same judgment that had calculated she had time, that the structure would hold, that she could reach Danny Morrison before the smoke became too thick. The judgment that had been wrong. The puppy scrambled up a particularly steep section, small claws finding purchase on exposed roots. It looked back at Sophia with those intelligent brown eyes, waiting. She could turn around now. She could mark the location as best she could, hike back to where her radio worked, call in animal control and search and rescue. That would be protocol. That would be safe. But the puppy's urgency was undeniable, and somewhere beyond the wall she'd built around her instincts, something whispered that time mattered, that whatever lay ahead couldn't wait for proper procedure and backup units. Sophia grabbed an exposed root and pulled herself up the incline, her boots finding precarious holds on the rocky slope. The puppy's tail wagged once briefly before it turned and continued deeper into the wilderness, leading her toward whatever catastrophe demanded an officer who'd stopped trusting herself. The path the puppy chose seemed to defy logic, cutting sideways across the slope rather than following any natural trail. Sophia's trained eye began catching details that made her pulse spike. A young sapling bent at an unnatural angle, its bark stripped away on one side. Fresh scarring on a pine trunk at roughly bumper height, the wood beneath still pale and exposed. These weren't the random damages of weather or wildlife. Something large had come through here, and recently. She paused at a cluster of disturbed ferns, their fronds crushed and browning, where something heavy had pressed them into the earth. The soil beneath showed parallel gouges, deep furrows that could only mean one thing. Sophia crouched down, running her fingers along the edge of one depression. Tire tracks, wide ones, consistent with an SUV or truck. They cut through the undergrowth at a sharp angle, heading downslope toward terrain that grew increasingly unstable. Her training clicked into automatic assessment mode. Vehicle left the road at speed, driver either overcorrected or lost control entirely. The trajectory suggested the car hadn't stopped willingly. She stood quickly, scanning the path ahead with new urgency. If someone had crashed out here days ago, if they were injured or trapped, every minute mattered exponentially. The puppy seemed to sense her shift in understanding. It moved faster now, no longer pausing to check if she followed. Its previous purposeful trot became something more desperate, small legs pumping as it navigated around obstacles and under fallen logs. Between the increased pace came sounds Sophia hadn't heard before. High-pitched whimpers that spoke of distress and exhaustion, punctuated by sharp barks that felt like commands. Hurry, please hurry. She followed the tire tracks, her own pace increasing despite the treacherous footing. More signs appeared with disturbing frequency. A side mirror hanging from a broken branch, its glass spiderwebbed, but still intact. Fragments of red plastic that looked like taillight debris scattered across moss-covered stones. A long scrape mark on a boulder where metal had kissed stone hard enough to leave paint behind. The puppy's whimpering grew more insistent, almost frantic. It would run ahead 10 yards, then circle back to Sophia, barking sharply at her boots as though trying to make her move faster. The desperation in those sounds cut through her professional detachment. This wasn't just an animal seeking help. This was a creature that had been trying to get assistance for some time, repeatedly, unsuccessfully, until finally encountering her patrol car. How long had this puppy been running this path, trying to find someone who would follow? The terrain shifted abruptly, becoming a steep descent scattered with loose rocks and exposed roots. The tire tracks were deeper here, carved into softer earth where the vehicle had clearly been fighting gravity and losing. Through the trees ahead, Sophia could see a change in the light, an opening in the canopy that suggested a clearing or drop-off. The puppy broke into a full sprint toward that opening, its barks becoming continuous, almost screaming. Sophia ran after it, her hand instinctively moving to her duty belt, though she had no idea what she was about to face. Sophia burst through the tree line and onto what appeared to be a flat rocky outcrop, her boots skidding slightly on loose gravel. The puppy stood rigidly at what looked like solid ground ahead, but something about the way vegetation grew at an odd angle made Sophia freeze mid-step. She approached slowly, carefully, and her stomach dropped as the truth revealed itself. What she'd mistaken for continuous ground was actually the crumbling edge of a ravine, partially concealed by overgrown bushes and the deceptive angle of approach. The earth simply ended, giving way to open air and a drop that made her head spin. She went down on one knee instinctively, distributing her weight, and crawled the last few feet to peer over the edge. Her blood turned to ice water. 20 feet below, suspended in a nightmarish tangle of small trees and thick vegetation clinging to the cliff face, was a silver SUV. But it wasn't resting there. It was caught there, vertical, nose pointed straight down into the abyss. The rear wheels were higher than the roof, the entire vehicle held in place only by the stubborn roots of saplings and the branches of scrub trees that had somehow found purchase in the rock face. The SUV's weight had bent those trees at impossible angles, their trunks groaning under the strain. Sophia's trained eye followed the vehicle's precarious position down to where the cliff continued, and her breath caught. 300 feet, maybe more. The canyon bottom was a jumble of boulders and rushing water, barely visible through morning mist. If those trees gave way, if the roots tore free, if even a strong gust of wind shifted the balance. She didn't let herself finish the thought. The vehicle's rear window was shattered, offering a dark view into the interior. Sophia could make out shapes inside, the silhouette of the driver's seat, something that might be a person. The SUV creaked ominously, metal groaning against wood, and she watched in horror as a shower of small rocks and dirt broke free from around the embedded front end, tumbling down into the void below. The trees shuddered. The vehicle shifted perhaps an inch, if that. But it was enough. One wrong vibration, one weakening root, one moment of structural failure, and everything currently held by luck and vegetation would plunge into that canyon. The puppy began barking again, sharp and insistent, staring down at the vehicle with its whole body trembling. Not from fear, Sophia realized, from desperate hope. Because someone was down there, someone the puppy knew, someone who needed help before physics and gravity finished what the crash had started. Sophia's hands were shaking as she pulled back from the edge. Her radio was still dead. Her phone still showed no signal. She was alone on a mountain with a vehicle that could fall at any second, potentially carrying someone who'd been trapped for days in a metal coffin suspended above certain death. Every nightmare she'd been avoiding for 6 months had just materialized in front of her, demanding she act. Sophia forced herself to breathe, to think past the panic clawing at her chest. She lay flat on the rocky outcrop, distributing her weight as she inched forward until she could see clearly through the shattered rear window. The interior was dim, the angle disorienting, but she could make out the driver's seat and the figure slumped there, held in place by a seat belt that might be the only thing keeping him from falling through the windshield and into the void. "Hey!" Her voice cracked slightly. She cleared her throat, tried again with more authority. "Can you hear me? I'm a police officer. Help is coming." The lie tasted bitter, but what else could she say? The silence stretched for several heartbeats, broken only by the whisper of wind through the canyon and the occasional creak of stressed metal. Then, barely audible, a sound that might have been a groan, or might have been her imagination desperate for a response. "I need you to answer me if you can," Sophia called down louder now. "Are you hurt? Can you move?" Another groan, clearer this time. Then a weak voice, hoarse and trembling. "Can't, can't move. Leg." Relief and terror hit her simultaneously. He was alive, conscious enough to speak, but trapped, injured, and she had no idea how badly. "What's your name?" she asked, keeping her voice steady, authoritative, the way they'd taught her in crisis management training. Michael Chen." Each word seemed to cost him. "How long?" "I'm going to get you out of there, Michael. I need you to stay very still, okay? Don't try to move. The vehicle isn't stable." As if to punctuate her words, the SUV shifted. Not much, perhaps half an inch, but enough that Sophia heard the grinding of metal against wood, the protest of roots under strain. A cascade of small rocks broke free and tumbled down the cliff face. Michael's groan became a strangled cry of fear. Sophia's hands were shaking violently now, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard it hurt. This was every nightmare that had kept her awake since Danny Morrison. Alone. No backup. No one to share the decision-making or the burden of failure. A life depending entirely on her judgment, her choices, her ability to keep someone alive when everything around them was actively trying to kill them. The puppy pressed against her side, whimpering, its small body radiating tension and hope in equal measure. Down in that suspended coffin, Michael Chen had been trapped for days. She could hear it in his voice, the dehydration, the weakness, the edge of delirium. How much longer did he have? Hours? Minutes? How long before his body gave out, or before the trees did? Sophia pushed back from the edge, her mind racing. She needed equipment, rope, something to stabilize the vehicle, something to keep Michael alive while she figured out how to extract him from a metal cage hanging over 300 feet of nothing but death. Sophia ran. Not the careful, measured pace of someone navigating treacherous terrain, but a full sprint back through the forest, branches whipping at her face, roots threatening to trip her with every step. The puppy kept pace beside her, no longer leading but running alongside like a partner. Her lungs burned, her radio bounced painfully against her hip, but she didn't slow until she burst through the tree line and reached her patrol car. Her hands moved with trained efficiency, throwing open the trunk. Rope. 200 feet of rescue line she'd never expected to use. Road flares. Her emergency medical kit. A tire iron that could serve as a makeshift anchor point. She grabbed everything, slinging rope over her shoulder, stuffing supplies into a canvas bag. 30 seconds, no more, and she was running back. The return journey felt longer, each second stretching into eternity, while her mind calculated angles and anchor points and the 1,000 ways this could go catastrophically wrong. She shoved those thoughts down, buried them beneath muscle memory and training. At the cliff edge, she quickly assessed the nearby trees. A thick pine, roots visible and deep, that would hold. She looped the rope around it twice, testing the knot with her full weight. The puppy barked frantically as Sophia backed toward the edge, rope wrapped around her torso in a makeshift harness. This wasn't proper rappelling equipment, but it would have to do. She lowered herself over the rim, boots scrabbling for purchase on the rocky cliff face, testing each foothold before committing her weight. Loose stones skittered down into the canyon. Don't look down. Focus on the vehicle, one foot, then the other. She reached the SUV, positioning herself carefully on a narrow ledge formed by an outcropping of rock. This close, she could see Michael clearly through the shattered window. His face was gray, lips cracked, his right leg twisted at an angle that made her stomach turn. But his eyes were open, tracking her movement. "Michael, I'm here," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. I'm going to stabilize the vehicle, then we're going to wait for backup together. Can you tell me where else you're hurt? Just, just the leg, I think. His voice was barely a whisper. Been days. I know. You did good. You held on. She worked as she spoke, unwinding rope, looping it around the vehicle's frame, and back to anchor points on the cliff. Exposed roots, a sturdy sapling, anything that could distribute the weight. The vehicle groaned with each adjustment, shifting millimeters that felt like miles. Sophia's heart hammered, but her hands remained steady, tying knots she'd practiced 1,000 times in training. She wedged the tire iron between the SUV and a rock outcropping, creating a brace. It wouldn't hold forever, but it might hold long enough. She pulled emergency blankets from her bag, reaching through the window to wrap them around Michael's torso. Stay with me, Michael. Tell me about your life. Keep talking. And for the first time in 6 months, Sophia's instincts whispered that she could do this, that she was exactly where she needed to be. Sophia pulled herself back up the rope, arms burning, boots finding purchase on the cliff face through sheer determination. At the top, she collapsed for just a moment on solid ground, chest heaving. The puppy immediately pressed against her, whining softly, eyes fixed on the edge where Michael remained suspended in his metal cage. Stay, Sophia commanded gently, her hand on the puppy's head. Stay quiet, okay? I'll be right back. She moved quickly across the rocky outcrop and back into the forest, climbing up slope toward higher ground. Her radio remained stubbornly silent, filled with static. Higher. She needed to get higher. Her calves screamed in protest as she scrambled up a steep embankment, pulling herself up by exposed roots until she crested a ridge that gave her a clear view of the valley below. She keyed her radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Emergency traffic. Do you copy? The static broke. Unit 12, we copy. Go ahead. Relief nearly buckled her knees. I need immediate helicopter rescue and technical extraction team. I have one male victim trapped in a vehicle suspended on a cliff face. Coordinates. She rattled off the GPS position from memory, describing the terrain, the vehicle's precarious position, Michael's condition. Her training took over, delivering information in clear, concise bursts. Copy, Unit 12. Mountain Rescue is scrambling now. Helicopter ETA, 40 minutes. Can you maintain position with the victim? Affirmative. I'm going back down now. 40 minutes. Sophia checked her watch, committing the time to memory, then ran back to the cliff. The puppy hadn't moved, still lying at the edge, small body pressed to the ground watching. Sophia clipped back into her makeshift harness and rappelled down, faster now that she knew the route, knew which holds would support her weight. Michael, backup is coming. Helicopter in 40 minutes. You're going to be okay. She settled onto her narrow ledge, close enough to reach through the window and check his pulse. Thready but present. Talk to me. Tell me about Emma. The puppy, what's his story? Michael's eyes struggled to focus. Ranger. Emma was training him. Service dog. Smart. So smart. Sophia glanced up. The puppy, Ranger, lay motionless at the cliff's edge, dark eyes locked on the vehicle, on Michael, waiting, watching. And suddenly Sophia understood. This tiny creature had been doing this for days, keeping vigil over Michael when Emma couldn't anymore, running this path over and over, trying to find someone, anyone who would follow. Never giving up, even when exhaustion must have made every step agony. He saved your life, Sophia said quietly. He wouldn't let you go. Emma told him. Michael's voice faded, then strengthened slightly. Told him to find help. Last thing she said. Sophia kept talking, asking questions, sharing stories, anything to keep Michael conscious. Above them, Ranger maintained his vigil, a small guardian who'd refused to fail his mission. 35 minutes, 30, 25. Each minute marked by the steady rhythm of Sophia's voice and the unwavering loyalty of a puppy who understood what it meant to never abandon someone who needed you. The thump of rotor blades announced salvation long before the helicopter crested the ridge. Sophia had never heard a more beautiful sound. The technical rescue team descended with practiced precision, their equipment and expertise turning what had seemed impossible into a carefully choreographed operation. They stabilized the vehicle with industrial anchors, secured Michael in a rescue basket, and extracted him from the suspended SUV with movement so smooth it seemed almost routine. Sophia watched from solid ground as they lifted Michael toward the helicopter. Ranger pressed against her leg, finally allowing himself to shake with exhaustion now that his mission was complete. The helicopter banked away toward the nearest trauma center, and only then did Sophia allow herself to sit down heavily on the rocky outcrop, adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow. Detective James Walker arrived an hour later with the search and recovery team, his weathered face grave as Sophia recounted the sequence of events. He examined the SUV's registration retrieved from the glove box, his expression darkening. "Emma Rodriguez," he said quietly. "The vehicle's registered to her. Michael Chen was a passenger." "She must have gone for help," Sophia said, watching Ranger, who'd begun pacing at the forest edge, whining softly. "After the crash, she would have tried to get to the road." They found Emma the next morning. Sophia insisted on joining the search team, following Ranger as he led them through the forest with the same determined purpose he'd shown her. A mile from the crash site, in a small clearing carpeted with moss, Emma lay as though she'd simply laid down to rest. Her phone was clutched in one hand, screen dark, battery long dead. Evidence of her desperate crawl marked the earth behind her. Disturbed leaves, broken branches, drag marks where she'd pulled herself forward despite catastrophic internal injuries. Detective Walker carefully retrieved her backpack, opening it with gloved hands. Inside, among standard hiking supplies, was a worn journal. He flipped to the final entry, his jaw tightening as he read. He turned the journal toward Sophia without a word. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. "Ranger, good boy. Find help. Bring them to Michael. Don't stop." Below that, in increasingly erratic script, "Train for this. He knows he'll keep trying. Smart boy, brave boy, save Michael. Please save Michael." Sophia's vision blurred. Emma had known she was dying, had known her own injuries were fatal, and with her last coherent thoughts, she'd given Ranger a mission, trusting that the puppy she'd been training would understand, would persevere, would refuse to give up until someone followed him to Michael. Ranger sat beside Emma's body, head lowered, finally still. He'd completed his mission. He'd brought help. He'd saved Michael, just as Emma had commanded. But he'd lost the person who'd loved him, who'd trained him, who'd believed in him enough to trust him with a life. Sophia knelt beside the small dog, her hand gentle on his back. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved him. She'd be so proud of you." The investigation into Emma Rodriguez revealed a woman who dedicated her life to helping others. Sophia sat in Detective Walker's office 3 days after the rescue, reading through the file with a heaviness in her chest. Emma had been a veterinary technician with a passion for training service dogs. Ranger wasn't just a pet, he was her most promising candidate, selected from a litter specifically for his intelligence, drive, and temperament. She'd been working with him since he was 6 weeks old, Walker explained, sliding a photo across his desk. Emma and Ranger, the puppy barely bigger than her hand, both looking at the camera with identical expressions of determination. Basic obedience, task training, persistence exercises, teaching him to problem solve, to keep trying even when the first solution doesn't work. Sophia stared at the photo, understanding dawning. Ranger's refusal to give up, his ability to communicate urgency, his persistence in leading her through treacherous terrain. None of it was accidental. Emma had trained him to be exactly what he'd needed to be in that moment. She'd prepared him for a mission she couldn't have known he'd need to complete. County Animal Services called, Walker continued. They're willing to take him, evaluate him for their working dog program. With his training and proven performance, he'd make an exceptional search and rescue dog. Could save a lot of lives. Sophia nodded slowly. It made sense. Ranger had proven himself beyond any test a program could devise. He deserved to continue the work Emma had started with him. Or, Walker added, his tone carefully neutral, you could take him, if you wanted. Sophia looked up sharply. Walker's expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something that might have been understanding. I'm not... Sophia started, then stopped. Not what? Not ready? Not worthy? Not capable of taking care of something that needed her? She thought of the past 6 months, the isolation she'd wrapped around herself like armor, the way she'd chosen empty mountains over the messiness of human connection, convinced that keeping distance meant keeping safe. She thought of Ranger, who'd also lost someone he loved, who'd also experienced catastrophic failure despite doing everything right, who'd also been given a second chance at purpose. Can I see him? She asked quietly. They brought Ranger from the temporary kennel where he'd been staying. The puppy walked into the office with his head low, his usual energy dimmed. But when he saw Sophia, something shifted. His ears perked forward. His tail gave a tentative wag. Sophia knelt down on the floor and Ranger walked straight into her arms. She felt his small body press against her chest, felt the rapid beat of his heart, and something inside her that had been frozen for 6 months finally cracked open. Your name is Ranger, she said, her voice thick with emotion, and you're coming home with me. The puppy's tail wagged harder, and Sophia realized they were both getting exactly what they needed. Someone who understood that survival sometimes meant accepting help, and that healing meant learning to trust again. 6 months transformed everything and nothing at all. Sophia stood at the podium in the community center. Ranger sitting calmly at her feet wearing his official emotional support vest, and looked out at the faces gathered for the memorial. 2 names were etched on the commemorative plaque being unveiled today. Emma Rodriguez and Danny Morrison. Separate tragedies, separated by months and circumstances, but connected by the invisible thread of loss and the harder work of healing. I didn't know Emma Rodriguez, Sophia began, her voice steady, but she saved my life anyway. She told them about the puppy who wouldn't give up, about the training and love Emma had poured into a creature small enough to hold in 2 hands. She told them about learning that heroism wasn't about being perfect or fearless. It was about showing up when everything in you wanted to run, about trusting yourself when you had every reason not to. After the ceremony, Sophia drove to the rehabilitation center across town. Michael Chen had invited her weeks ago, but she'd waited until she felt ready, until Ranger seemed ready. They found him in the physical therapy gym, walking between parallel bars with grit-teeth determination, his gait uneven but improving. When Michael saw them, he stopped mid-step. His physical therapist moved to steady him, but Michael waved her off, his eyes locked on Ranger. Tears spilled down his cheeks before he could speak. Hey, buddy, he managed, lowering himself carefully into a nearby wheelchair. Ranger approached slowly, carefully, as though sensing Michael's fragility. He placed his head gently on Michael's lap, and Michael's hands sank into the puppy's fur. Fuller now, healthy, the coat of a dog who was loved and cared for. He saved my life, Michael said, looking up at Sophia. You both did. He saved mine too, Sophia replied quietly, just in a different way. They stayed for an hour, watching Michael work through his exercises, Ranger's presence seeming to fuel determination in both patient and officer. On the drive home, Sophia felt something settle in her chest, a peace she hadn't experienced since before Danny Morrison. before guilt had convinced her that one failure defined her worth. That night, Sophia pulled out her own journal, a new habit borrowed from Emma's example. She wrote by lamplight while Ranger dozed on his bed beside hers. Some angels have paws, some second chances have four legs. Emma taught Ranger to never give up, and Ranger taught me the same lesson. Heroism isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. It's about trusting your instincts even when they failed you before. It's about refusing to quit, even when you're small, exhausted, and the odds seem impossible. We saved each other, Michael, Ranger, and me. Emma's final gift wasn't just Ranger's training. It was the reminder that love persists, that loyalty endures, and that sometimes the smallest creatures carry the biggest hearts. She closed the journal and looked at Ranger, who slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. His mission was complete. He'd saved Michael. He'd saved Sophia. And in doing so, he'd honored the woman who'd believed in him from the very beginning. Finally, they were both home. If you like this video and want to see more just like it, then make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And I'm genuinely curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far these incredible stories reach.